Eli Grant took the groundskeeper job at Miller's Grove Cemetery because grief makes strange math. He told people it was the benefits and the hours, a better paycheck than the bike shop, and a 3-minute drive from the little rental where his mother's slippers still waited by the door. The truth was smaller and heavier. He wanted to be near the place where his father's name had become metal and granite, to learn the shape of endings until it hurt less to say them. The first week was ordinary in the way only cemeteries can be. Mow rows that run straighter than apologies, string trim around stones with names that sound like streets, blow the clippings off the granite so the day's grief can see itself reflected without grass on its face. The old riding mower coughed in the mornings and accepted bribes of WD-40 like a person. On Tuesday, a funeral caravan arrived slow over the gravel. Eli set flags, straightened chairs, stood back in the shade and learned the rhythm. The hush, the prayer, the shovel that leans against nothing at a respectful angle. Amber Sloan from Sloan Reeves' funeral home had the practiced mercy of a woman who has taught rooms how to breathe. She nodded to Eli after the committal. "Good work," she said, which in this line of work meant visible and invisible labor both. The grass cut, the tent staked, the chaos contained. Pastor Tom said the usual words about dust without sounding bored. Families left tissues like weather. At the end of the week, grounds manager Deacon pulled a lanyard from his pocket and handed over the brass key that opens the map room. "You'll need to learn plots," he said. "Janine's out 2 weeks with her hip. Just keep the book tidy." The map room was a paneled closet off the office with a metal desk and a corkboard with more thumbtacks than mercy. It smelled like copier heat and old pencil. On one wall, a laminated grid of the 42 acres divided into sections and gardens with names that tried to be comforting devotion, evergreen, sunrise. On the desk, a binder as heavy as a mortgage, the plot book, hand-inked for 100 years, and then around 2004, quietly supplanted by a flat-screen monitor that hummed the way secrets hum. The software was called Elysium Pro, which felt like an inside joke you only laughed at if you'd already lost. Eli clicked through menus that sounded like a legal pad inventory, ownership pre-need, work orders. A help bubble floated. Optimize future capacity with predictive pre-need. He said the phrase out loud and heard how a sentence can hold both kindness and theft. He looked up his father's plot because you test a system with what you trust. The screen showed a green square in Garden C, Section 17, Lot 22, Space 2, one name filled, one available. Next of kin, Marion Grant. He exhaled. The present had at least this much integrity. On Monday, a normal morning tilted. The county IT guy came to refresh certificates, which is the kind of sentence that pretends to be boring. He wore a badge that said Voss Municipal Services and a shirt that made him look like a cable commercial. Mayor Whitaker had privatized IT last fall. The city said it was efficiency. The cemetery board said it was a discount. The screen flickered. The help bubble changed. Pre-need recommendations now powered by CitySync. That night, the new algorithm went to work. Eli didn't know that until he opened the plot book the next morning and found a sticky note in Janine's neat hand. Names showing in pre-need, not in binder. Bug, do not assign without me. He clicked pre-need. The list wasn't names so much as predictions, age, zip, relationship density scores, estate status, burial preferences gleaned from surveys nobody remembered taking. Igor, 19. CO8. 2025, 756. It suggested the cemetery pre-mark likely availability for 100 living residents' tiny gray boxes on the map, polite as pencil, quietly waiting for the future to become inventory. Halfway down the list, he saw a name he recognized from the bike shop, Mrs. Eberly, who knitted seat covers and brought muffins to the kids who raced after school. Under eligibility, a note, no immediate kin, pre-authorized plot in Evergreen, coordinate with Sloan Reeves upon event. Event, not death, event. Eli's stomach went cold and then angry. He clicked the little UI to see where Elysium Pro had learned this voice. The justification panel opened like an indictment, hospital readmissions, utility shutoff notices, property tax delinquency, social media loneliness indicators. It was a spreadsheet trying not to look like a net. He printed the list because paper sometimes makes a machine behave better. The pages slid out, hot and guilty. He folded them into his jacket and went out to dig the afternoons open, as if a hole in the ground could favor one kind of truth over another. Back at the map room after closing, he clicked through the gray boxes, zooming section by section. One of the newly penciled plots sat 12 spaces from his father. Another circled a place in Potter's Field below the highway, a patch that had been grass and quiet since the city stopped burying indigent dead there in the 80s. Potter's Field had no names on stones, only numbers on rebar stakes that sink like promises. The algorithm had made it a suggestion again. He found his mother's name on the list on the third page. Marion Grant, age 58, widowed, utilities, late twice last winter, network proximity, low, pre-need inclination, low and known, recommendation, tentative, plot, Garden C, Section 17, Lot 22, Space 1. They had penciled in his mother into the space next to his father with the certainty of a calendar alert. The software called it love. Eli's fist closed around the paper until it became a shape that could injure a palm. He smoothed it back out, hands shaking. The plot next to his father had been theirs by common sense. They'd talked on the porch about it the night after the funeral, sipping grocery store bourbon in coffee mugs so the neighbors wouldn't have to worry about being worried. They hadn't paid. Elysium Pro had pre-authorized. Someone had decided to put their name on the square where her name was supposed to go only when she was done using it. He took the pages to Deacon. "What is this?" Deacon squinted at the gray boxes like he was looking for raccoons. "That's the new thing Janine hates," he said. "CitySync wants us to be proactive, helps the board plan. People like to know the neighborhood they'll be in." He meant it. The joke had convinced him. "You're marking living people," Eli said. "We're not marking," Deacon said. "We're preparing. It's tentative." On a map on a wall in a room where we assign the dead. "The city needs forecasts," Deacon said, and then added softer, like a man who has learned what gets him through the day. "It's just lines on a screen, kid. That week, the small violences accumulated." Amber called to say a family's pre-need contract had been changed to optimize family adjacency, which meant a husband and wife would no longer be side by side but 2 spaces apart because a developer had bought the middle space 10 years ago for a cousin who had moved to Phoenix. The map said adjacency by angle still counted. Pastor Tom asked Eli if there was a way to keep the church folk in perpetual care and the lapsed in general because the donors were asking. He laughed when he said it and somehow made the laugh burn more than the words. A man came to the office with a letter on city letterhead that said his mother's plot had been repurposed because her pre-need account had lapsed in 1997. She wasn't dead. She had moved to live with his sister. He had framed the letter like a diploma and held it in his shaking hands like a weapon he wasn't sure he was allowed to use. Igor, 19. 08. 2025, 7:56. On Friday, Eli walked to Potter's Field with a coffee and a stubbornness. The grass there feels different under boots, as if it remembers how many people wrote to no one for permission to be human. He counted the rebar stakes and found 3 with fresh ribbon orange, the color of construction, and warning fluttering. He knelt. The numbers were new. The ground had a weight that had nothing to do with dirt. After sunset, he sat at his mother's kitchen table and spread the printouts. Marion came in from her shift at the call center, kicked off shoes, poured 2 fingers into a mug without coffee. "What's that?" she asked. "Names," he said. "Of dead people? Not yet." She listened the way mothers listen when the world tries to rebrand danger as policy. When he showed her her own listing, she laughed once, ugly. "Well, that's presumptuous," she said, and then ran a thumb along the edge of the paper like she could smooth the future into submission. She didn't cry. She put the page on the fridge with the RSVP magnets from weddings they had attended when everybody still believed in June. "If I'm penciled in," she said, "we'll ink something else." Saturday's funeral was for Councilwoman Hobbs's father, a man whose picture had smiled from park dedication plaques longer than Eli had been alive. The family wanted Garden A near the willow and the fanciest benches. Elysium Pro had flagged the space as VIP protected. The tent went up. The floral arrangements looked like the lobby of a hotel that confused grief with taste. Amber stood at the head of the grave with a professional sadness. The mayor arrived. The Voss IT man stood at the back in a suit that tried too hard. In the map room, the plot reservation for the councilwoman's father blinked gold. Eli set the chairs. He checked the depth with the gauge. Deacon nodded at him to bring the green mat. In the map room, his mother's penciled square felt like a small scream. He took a clean index card and wrote in block letters, "Neat as a boy who wants the right grade. This square is a living person." He taped it over the gold square on the laminated wall map with blue painter's tape and took a picture on his phone before his courage could return to being a theory. He didn't mean to make a scene, he meant to make sense. But the board president came in for a bottled water, saw the card, and made outrage into a project. "Who put this here?" "I did," Eli said. "You don't label VIP plots," she said. "I labeled my mother," he said, placing the words carefully, like bricks. "You're fired," she said, which is a sentence that should take longer to arrive. Out by the tent the minister had started, the family watched the open space as if it might snap shut like a mouth. Amber looked toward the office when she heard the noise because funeral directors hear trouble the way cats hear things you pretend aren't there. Not today, Amber said to the board president at the map room door. You can fire a man after we put your father in the ground. The board president levered her indignation into a better posture. The mayor cleared his throat in the way that means cameras. Eli stood with his hands in the pockets that made him look less like a problem and wished his father were the one who had taught him how to talk to rich people. He went back to the grave. He did the work. After the last handful of dirt, after the chair legs chirped against the grass as they folded, after the caravan floated away in a ribbon of black paint and hazard flashers, he walked back to the map room to get his jacket and the copy of the plot book that isn't supposed to leave the building. The index card with his sentence was gone. The gold square blinked. He took the photo from his phone and texted it to an email address he'd made 10 minutes earlier. Map Room Truth. He texted it to Amber, who texted back a period, then, you're not wrong, then, be careful. Eager, 19. Derate. 2025, 7:56. At midnight, sleep failed and stubbornness drove. He unlocked the shed and took the bucket of lime and the cheap stakes they use when the ground is frozen and the map book won't behave. He walked to Garden C in the streetlight that makes cedar trees look theatrical. He pushed a stake into the square next to his father and tied a strip of caution tape to it. He did the same in 3 other squares that belonged to living people, Mrs. Eberly, an old coach who still yelled at track meets, a woman from church whose laugh could be heard 2 gardens over. He printed cards on the little office printer and taped them to each stake. This square is a living person. Come stand in it, Sunday 3rd p.m. He thought he might be fired anyway. He might as well tell the truth out loud. Sunday was warm and indecisive. The town came in polite clusters like mushrooms after rain. 5 people stood in their own squares. 12 came to stand with them because grief is social. Amber brought thermoses of church coffee and acted like she was simply here for hydration. Pastor Tom put his hands in his pockets and tried very hard not to own the room. The Voss man stood by the gate pretending he was a tree. Eli read the names off the list, not all, not the ones who hadn't had a chance to know yet, not the ones who would be afraid, just the ones who were here, who had chosen to stand in a square and say, with their bodies, not yet. He held the paper where everyone could see the fonts that had tried to be merciful. When he finished, people clapped the way towns clap when they need to do something with their hands that isn't anger. At 3:20, Councilwoman Hobbs arrived with righteous speed, eyed the stakes, the cards, the coffee, and said the sentence the powerful all learn, this is not the time. Eli said, this is literally the time. Your software is already drawing the lines. The mayor arrived with a smile like canceled plans. The board president asked who authorized a gathering. Amber stepped closer to Eli the way people step closer to lightning rods they like. Pastor Tom found a microphone he hadn't used since Easter and said, we're going to listen now. And for once, a man in a collar did the right thing. The Voss man tried to explain Predictive Pre Need as a public service, a way to ensure families could be together, a way to avoid the heartbreak of sold-out sections. He used words like consent flows and opt-outs. He clicked his tablet and displayed a heat map of the town in colors that made poverty look festive. Eli watched the crowd see it the moment a room shifts from confusion to comprehension. You could hear the air take sides. A reporter from the Cedar Rapids paper showed up because the internet had already performed its ritual. She asked gentle, sharp questions. She photographed the stakes with their little flags like kindergarten art projects that had decided to unionize. She took a picture of Eli and his mother beside the stake by his father's stone. Marion's chin was up in a way that made Eli's throat decide it was a problem. Monday morning, the city issued a statement. Elysium Pro's Predictive Pre Need had not been fully configured, and no final assignments had been made without consent. The mayor added that no living person's burial location had been revealed publicly, which everyone understood meant except for the squares where people had chosen to stand. At 9 a.m., Deacon met Eli at the shed. You are technically fired, he said, but also everyone's mad and the board doesn't know how to do a Wednesday funeral without you. So if you want to work today for cash and plausible deniability, I'll look the other way. I want to work, Eli said, because grief pays poorly and also because he loved the ground. At 10, Amber slid him a folded paper. Inside, a photocopy of a purchase agreement. The councilwoman's father had prepaid for a different square in 1999. The gold square had been optimized last year to make room for a walking path in the proposed donor brochure. Igor, 19th, Niloit. 2025, 7:56. The signed pre-need had been shifted to adjacent equivalency. Amber had written in the margin, "They do it to everybody." Then, "You didn't hear it from me?" He took the copy to the map room and put it on the desk and placed a recorder app on his phone face down because some days you have to teach your own courage how to behave. When the board president arrived with the mayor and the Voss man to discuss stakeholder concerns, he asked, calm, if the city had authorization from living residents to mark any tentative plots. The Voss man said the marks were internal only. Eli showed the printed map with the gold squares. The board president said, "We never put that on public display," and Eli turned the phone over to show the photo of the index card, the one that had been taped in this room yesterday before hands removed it. He showed the timestamp of the photo. He listened to the muscles behind the board president's smile decide to be a jaw. On Wednesday, they were scheduled to bury a man who had left behind nothing but a car payment and a brother who thought the world owed him an apology. The grave was in Potter's Field, which the city had renamed Garden K in a brochure so donors wouldn't flinch when asked to sponsor the mowing equipment. Eli had never been asked to open there in his first months because the city had been pretending the stakes were not new. The map said section K3, space 112. He walked to K3 with a measuring tape and counted wrong twice and right once and drove the marker and put the little canopy and tried to pretend none of this was about math that hurts. The first shovel scraped metal at 12 inches. He stopped because you stop when the earth tells you the story you want to edit. He pulled the turf back gently and found an old vault lid, the kind from the 70s with a concrete face and a nameplate that had rusted to synonyms. Space 112 had been a stack. Someone had buried another person over that person in the 90s during a flu wave when the city had been broke and the records had been index cards in a building that had leaked. The second burial had never been logged in the book. The algorithm had never seen it because numbers do not go to the back fence to smoke and tell you what it remembers. He called Deacon, who swore soft and biblical. He called Amber, who arrived fast because funeral directors can smell disaster like bakeries, smell yeast. She looked at the vault, and then at Eli, and then at the sky. Pastor Tom arrived because he had the day off and a sense of occasion. The board president arrived because reporters already had. The Voss man stayed home because his job had become release a statement later. Eli didn't say, "I told you so." He didn't say anything at first. He lifted the turf back over the scar and sat on the little aluminum chair made for people who think they have to sit or they'll fall. Then he stood and said the only sentence he could find that didn't make him hate his own mouth. "The map is wrong," he said. "We need to stop pretending it isn't." Amber put a hand on his shoulder. "What do you want to do?" she asked, like a real question, like someone had brought the room a door. "Pull the gray boxes," he said, "every one. No more pre-assignments to living people. Print the book again. Walk the ground with the book. Ask the old man at the fence who remembers where the twins are. Pay Mrs. Eberly for knitting covers for the mower seats. Put names where names go only when names are ready." The board president started to say, "Policy." Pastor Tom said, "To no one specific and everyone, we'll do what's right." And for once, the sentence felt like a tool instead of an aesthetic. The mayor looked at the cameras and decided to be a man in a story that would live on the internet forever. He nodded. Igor, 19. Sue, 8. 2025, 7:56. By Friday, the city announced a pause on the Predictive Pre Need program pending public input. Elysium Pro issued a statement about misconfiguration and fired a contractor who had been annoying anyway. Voss Municipal Services updated a footer on their website. The Cedar Rapids paper ran Eli's photo above the fold with the headline, "Living Residents Ask City to Erase Their Graves." The internet made jokes and then made donations. Mrs. Eberly brought muffins and cried when the stake by her name came up and the hole left behind was just a hole for gophers and not for her. Eli kept the job because the city needed him more than it wanted to punish him. He mowed, trimmed, dug, and sometimes at the edge of the day when the light makes the stones look taller, he walked to Garden C, Section 17, Lot 22, Space 1, and stood in the square next to his father and tried out the feeling of someday without the feeling of algorithm. He and his mother went to the office one Tuesday with the check and bought that square the old way, hand to hand, paper to paper, the plot book inked in Janine's tidy hand. They had coffee. They toasted something that contained both grief and relief. Sometimes, in the map room, the screen still flickered the ghost of gray boxes when no one was looking. Eli turned the monitor off when that happened, the way you close a window when weather changes. He took the plot book down, laid it on the desk, put a finger on a name, and reminded himself that the best maps are drawn by people who remember what paths feel like when you walk them. A month later, at a Sunday afternoon service with more sun than wisdom, Amber asked him to speak into the good microphone about process improvements, which sounded like a joke the room needed. He said, "We don't assign the living." He said, "We don't bury twice." He said, "We ask before we decide what belongs to whom." The crowd clapped, and the sound felt like a building deciding to be better. He drove home past the sign for the new park the councilwoman had wanted named after her father. The city had voted to call it Common Ground instead. It was corny and correct. He parked. He walked inside. The grass there would need mowing. He made a note on his phone to bring the city a mower that didn't cough. He went home to his mother's porch and gave her the copy of the plot receipt, and she put it in a folder labeled Important, as if the future were a document you could organize. After dark in the map room, when the building sighs the way buildings do when they have decided to try again tomorrow, the laminated wall map hung quiet. No gold squares, no gray boxes, just green and little numbers, and the understanding that the work of being decent is measured in steps and hands, and the time it takes to walk to a square and say, aloud, not yet.